This is my title. What type of home educator are you? Conviction or convenience? And Nelson Mandela said, strong convictions are the secret of surviving deprivation. Your spirit can be full even when your stomach is empty. That is just telling you somebody who's no faith in God, who had no faith in God, knows that strong convictions are vital. The other reason it's there is because I first gave this presentation at the Home Educators Family Festival, which is a very secular event, and I couldn't be as bold as I like to be about Christianity, but I'd slip in things like that. Strong convictions are important. This is a poster I made about the current bill. Anybody spot the change of name? The Children's Woe and Surveillance Bill. I think that's far more accurate. How many times does the word well-being, which is in the proper title, appear in the text of the bill? Twice. Very low down. It's not about well-being, it's about oversight. The whole lot of it is about oversight, and it's also about economics. I may get onto that in questions or in conversations later, but it's not about well-being. We'll come back to that slide. Okay, where's the bill up to? This is headlined as a political update. This slide is your political update. You know me by now if you've been coming. I do far more than just tell you where the bill's at. Okay, it's completed all its stages in the House of Commons. It's had its second reading in the House of Lords. It's partway through the committee stage in the Lords. The final, once today, there's one next Wednesday, there's two the following week, and then it finishes. But a few days after it, the same day it finishes, party conference recess begins, which is essentially 3 weeks when Parliament aren't not being Parliament, right? So nothing will happen during that period. Report stage will start after the recess. Convention says there should be 7 sitting days, so it may well get in, probably not before the half-term recess. They still act like a school in Parliament, if you haven't noticed. They're on holiday when the schools are. But it will probably run in to early November. The third reading, therefore, and passing are likely to happen in November or early December. Till I've seen the timetable, I cannot tell you when it will be, but it's likely to be one of those options. So that is when we're looking at third reading and passing sometime then, and then we get, in proper parliamentary language, the consideration of amendments, better known as ping pong, where the bill goes between the House of Lords and the House of Commons time and time again. I don't think that will involve much about home education, because I really don't think the government are going to allow many changes to this section. But it may slow the bill down. Royal assent, when it becomes law in the first stage, may well be in December. Once it has, expect a new consultation. By the way, consultations are consultations by the government in name only. They know what answers they want and they wait it. There will be a consultation which should last for 3 months, and I expect the bill regarding home education to come into force after that, most likely autumn next year. That is what's happening. And as I say, this is a foundational change. It will, the government, well, not the government, the civil service believe they have an argument that says that school can be compulsory for every school-age child. And that is their end goal. And my question is, what will you do then? There's 3 options: fight, flight, or freeze, right? By the way, these slides will all be on the page. I'll give them as PDFs. You can download them all. And I'm also thankful for the many people who leave graphics around the internet that I can borrow. I'm not selling them on. I'm not making any profit from them. Here's another one I borrowed, because I think many home educators will do that. Isn't it a wonderful picture? It's actually part of 400 demonstrators who were protesting back in 2014 against the Australian government's climate change policy. But really, I was looking for a cartoon and I found that. It's brilliant. Why have I put a birthday cake there? I need to find out roughly how old my audience is. I have a feeling I might be the oldest person in the room. Might not be the oldest person on site, but I might be the oldest person. So is anybody here that was born in the 1940s? Anybody here like Mary and me that were born in the 1950s? 60s? Ah, right. 70s? Yeah. 80s? 90s? Noughties? Right. Okay, that may be right. Okay. I've asked that for a reason, and it's this. I want to talk to you now about why educational freedom is being removed, not just in this country, but around the world. Have you ever heard of that book, The Utopia Experiment? Neither had I till I found it on the internet. It's a really useful title for what I want to do, because it's a guy, well, he says, the review from Goodreads starts off, imagine you have survived an apocalypse. By the way, what does the guy who wrote that review mean by the word apocalypse? A disaster. A big, big disaster. What does the word actually mean at its roots? Revelation or an unveiling. That is its proper Greek root. It's an unveiling. You have to understand that words today don't get used like they've always been. And we need to check that out. That's a wider debate, but I just want to throw that in there. An apocalypse isn't a bad event. It's actually, for Christians, excellent good news. Right? But here it's used as a bad attempt, and this guy, Dylan Evans, set up a community in the Scottish Highlands to live out a utopian dream. What happened? Within a year, Evans found himself detained in a psychiatric hospital, shattered and depressed, trying to figure out what had gone wrong. And he's written the book about it. Why is that? Why trying to live in utopia has left somebody like that? Well, here's one clue. Here's a book you may have heard of. Animal Farm by George Orwell. Right? It's about a utopia that went wrong. What has all this got to do with this bill that's going through Parliament and what it's going to do in the British Isles and what's happening in many other countries? Well, we'll get there in a minute. How's your Latin? Anybody know what the Latin means up in that corner? That is a map of utopia by the guy who invented it, to illustrate the book by the guy who did it. The word was invented back in 1516 by Sir Thomas More to describe a fictional island society in the New World. He named the book Utopia because it literally stands as no place. Utopia does not and never will exist in this universe. Right? It is not good place, as some people think it means no place. My question, therefore, is have we all been living through an international utopian experiment? Everybody in this room, now I've checked your ages, I can confidently say was born into an international utopian experiment, including me. Yes. Right? And I want to say I think it's now happening like happened in Scotland in under a year, right? It's taken a bit longer, 70 plus years. We have all been living through an international experiment. And here's one of the guys who was a pioneer of it. Have you ever heard of Brock Chisholm? You've all heard of the World Health Organization these days, haven't you? You may have not done in 2018, but you've heard of it now. Brock Chisholm was the first Director General. And he said, children must be free to think in all directions, irrespective of their peculiar ideas, the peculiar ideas of parents who often seal their children's minds with preconceived prejudice and false concepts of past generations. Unless we are very careful indeed and very conscientious, there is still great danger that our children may turn out to be the same kind of people we are. People who started this experiment believed the answer to get to utopia was to disconnect you from your child's upbringing. Right? It's taken it 70 years to get to this stage. And home educators are a thorn in their side. We must move on. Today, you can hear utopian language. You know who this lady is? Yeah, Bridget Phillipson, Education Secretary. That guy in the last 12 months took over as the head of Ofsted. He must be an intelligent man. He told her that there was things he couldn't do in her timescale. And she wrote a letter. And this is the first paragraph in that letter. And I've highlighted both by underlining and italics all the soundbite jargon. This isn't the words of a thinking person. Ofsted's work is essential to this government's mission to break down barriers, open up opportunity, setting up every child for success, helping every child to achieve and thrive at school, and building skills for opportunity and growth so that every young person can follow the pathway that's right for them. Sounds nice, but it's utopian jargon. It is a dream world. You never get that. As Christians, you should know it. What does every newborn child come built into them? Sin. Right? It isn't parents who teach children to sin. Right? And all they're trying to do is get rid of sin without a saviour. They want to be the saviour. That is the vision behind the United Nations. And I'm disappointed that my parents' generation, there were not prophets calling that out from within the church. It's always been a policy to fail. Now, here's a good one for you. I like asking questions. What is the purpose of government? One word answer. Fun? Let me give you a clue. Have a good look at that. I've given you a clue. What's it called? Govern. The purpose of governments is to govern. Right? They are meant to be in charge, to make sure things work well. That's the biblical thing. They don't care about the biblical thing. They just want to govern. So, very quick overview of what the political landscape is like. Okay, that is what most people think. The political landscape stretches from left to right. It's a very one-dimensional picture, right? I want to bring in something else. There's another axis in the political landscape, which is authoritarian to libertarian. Now, where do you think on that cross is the best place for a government to be? In the middle. Exactly. Right? Balanced. Balance isn't easy to achieve, but so we can cope with a bit of oscillation. right? We can cope with them going one side or the other as long as they remain anchored to the middle and don't go too far down. Now, don't read into it left and right equals those. No, that is just there as it is. However, what we find is when governments get bigger, they don't want to go down to the libertarian side. They always go up to the authoritarian side. Why is that? Because governments govern. If they go become more libertarians, they're doing themselves out of a job, right? It's very simple. So whether they go left or right, if they grow, they never grow like that in balance on the other axis. They always grow like that, right? The bigger a government gets, the more authoritarian it gets, right? And this is, I think, it doesn't matter whether it's left or right. What was Hitler? Was he on the left or the right? Right? It's a bit of a circle. You get so authoritarian, you can't tell the difference. There's a lot of things in life like that. So, I want to say this is why I believe we live in a political landscape in which the freedom to home educate is being leached away. As I say, we have all been involved in this international utopian experiment without our consent, without our knowledge. One quick thing. We often go to human rights, and I think it's the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Point 3 has got 3 bullet points on it, or one of the things has got 3 bullet points on it. The third one is parents have the right to choose the type of education their child receives. Point 1 in that clause is every child should be taught the values of the United Nations. How can you reconcile those two? You can't. So, because of this, governments are getting bigger. Responsibility is being leached away from citizens, in this context, parents and families, to the state. The state now wants you to put this week's news. The state's making it possible for you to hand their babies over to you at 9 months old. They're paying you to do it. Right? They're not doing it for the good of the child. They want you in work. We are outliers because if you're home educating, one parent is economically inactive. Right? I like the term, I'm inventing a new phrase, family-based learning, sometimes known as home education, is perceived to be a threat to that experiment. There's a couple of names there. I've mentioned one of them. I'm not going into them. Governments fear what they don't understand and what they can't control. If they don't understand it, they can't control it. That is why they bring in draconian measures like making you fill in what your child's been doing with it if you have a change within 15 days, though there are rumours they're going to soften that a bit, but the intention is still there. They want to know. However, I want to say to you, their experiment is now failing. We're seeing it in lots of ways, but one reason is this, and some of you may remember this. I did an extra session last year, and I went down this line. The reason it's failing is governments do not fight for justice, right? But families do. Let me give you some examples. We've still got the Horizon post office scandal ongoing. Has government been fighting for justice? Have families? Do you remember the infected blood thing? Governments will want to sort that out? No. Windrush, right? Windrush there, and that's about Windrush. Families again, and even down here there's a link to Hillsborough. Hillsborough's very old. Those pictures aren't clear because they're from an old paper. But the families fought time and time again. We've had scandals in the national health that are still ongoing. I can't list them all. We've had child sexual exploitation scandals. Those are the well-known ones. This week, Rupert Lowe, who's an MP, got kicked out of reform. His inquiry, which has got problems, and published a list of, I think, about 80 different towns where children have been abused by grooming gangs, and he's already come into criticism because some of the ones where it's happened have not been listed. That is how widespread this is, and the government do it. When things go wrong, governments protect themselves. That's the bottom line. Families fight for justice. And let me say, how many of you remember Baby P? Yeah? Baby P was used to change the landscape on child safeguarding. And the key phrase was, this must never happen again. Right? A utopian thing. But it opens the door for wider oppressive things. You don't want children to be abused. Isn't that what they were saying when this bill was introduced? You don't want to let children fail. Now, have families in these examples, and in many I've not listed, been motivated by conviction or convenience? Conviction. Something's wrong in that case. Have they had an impact by conviction or convenience? Conviction. So my question is, will home educators make an impact by conviction or convenience? So my closing observation of part one, I'll tell you why it's part one in a minute. I'm doing really well, actually. The bill will probably go through without significant amendment in respect to the freedom to home educate, or the loss of freedom to be at home educate or to be home educated. Home educators cannot directly change the prevailing political opinion. We are outliers when it comes to the failing search for the mythical universal utopia. However, I do believe we can change the public narrative by engaging in multiple arenas. I do think we can do that. Some of them are not political arenas. There are other places. I think when the bill goes through, we will have to resort to the courts. That is fraught with dangers. We need the right cases and the best grounds. I am very thankful that the Christian Institute, when the bill started going through the Commons, had its second reading, had got a very good legal opinion from Aidan O'Neill, who took the case for them on the Scottish Named Person Scheme. That is an excellent legal opinion. If the government don't take notice of it, they will be in trouble. But the courts, as you may have realised, are now politicised. And they interpret things through the objectives of the government, not the rights of the citizens. However, now is the time to think about what you will do if a big government presses ahead with taking your family's freedoms away. Only you know if your commitment to continue facilitating your own children's learning is based on your convictions or in a matter of convenience. There were home educator pioneers who were like an icebreaker breaking up the ice. There are now a lot of home educators who are doing it out of convenience. I don't know your heart. God knows your heart. Ask him which you are, because it will be important. Back to this, my poster. Did anybody, having looked at it now, notice anything strange about that picture? When you get a wrecking ball knocking a building down, when the ball hits the wall, what happens? Which one falls apart? The building. What's falling apart there? The ball, right? I believe if families stand strong, the ball will crumble. Right, we've got end of part one. As I said, I gave this talk at Chess. If you want to share this with non-Christian friends, I'll link to it from this page. Please give them that page, because I'm now going into full Christian mode. Right? And Lord, give us wisdom. Okay, this is a quote from the Bible. How many believe that's true? Eh? But it's in the Bible, right? You've got to get things in context, haven't you? Oh, by the way, don't stick your hand up, don't mumble, just think to yourself, how many of us live like that? How many of us live that tomorrow will be like today, but more so? Here's the full context. God's complaining about people at the time of Isaiah, whatever his warnings are, they say, come on, let's have a party. Tomorrow will be like today. Right? You must get everything in context. Here's another one. Do you believe this? Night is coming when no one can work. Do you believe that? Do you live as if you believe it? Right? That is from the New Testament. That's the words of Jesus. We must work the works of him who sent me as long as it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. Night is coming when no one can work. Okay, what's this one? Would any Christian have this attitude ever? All right, let us eat and drink for tomorrow. Again, I say, even to Christians, do you live like that? Why do I say that? Well, it originally comes from Isaiah, right? God called for weeping and mourning, for sackcloth, but the people had a party. And then let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. But please notice, Paul quotes it in 1 Corinthians 15 to Christians. So yes, Christians can end up living as if tomorrow will be like today. As if night isn't coming. As if everything's going to be rosy. Right, let's move on. I'm sure you know this, Matthew 16, Jesus got fed up of the Pharisees testing him and arguing with him. Actually, if you want to see that in its full glorious technicolor, do read the Gospel of John. It's really how much the Pharisees and Jesus didn't get on with each other. But here he says to them, he says, you're always asking for a sign. He says, do you know how to discern the appearance of the sky, but cannot discern the signs of the times? Right? Have you thought about that phrase? Can you discern the signs of the times? Let's say, which times am I talking about? He did not say of the end times. That verse is so often applied to the end times. He was not talking about the end times, he was talking about the times in which they lived. He said the signs of the times. Which times? Where the people of Israel were in their history when Jesus was here for the first time. They believed the brand new shiny temple that Herod had built was the precursor of the Messiah coming back to set up his universal reign of peace. That is what the popular feeling was in the day. And the Pharisees weren't quite sure. And they thought, this guy can't be that guy. Right? Another question, which is why we're on end times. I'm sure you all know Matthew 24. How many signs of the end times are described in Matthew? Give me a round number. Okay. 5? 6? 10? 15? Okay, I'll tell you what my answer is. None. The majority of what is described there are about what would happen between Jesus' ascension and his return. Because the disciples were asking him, when will your kingdom be established? And they're expecting it to be next week, right? And Jesus goes at length to say, hang on guys, it's not going to be that quick, and there's going to be a lot of trouble happening. But there is. How many signs of the end of the age are described in that same chapter? It is more than none. It's just one, and it's a very simple one. The gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come. Right? Everything else, the wars, the rumours of wars, have been happening ever since Jesus left us. Right? This is the one. I'm just putting that for context because really I'm talking about the signs of the times today. But before I get there, this is a well-known start of 2 verses. How good's your scripture memory? How many can carry on that? For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. For the Jew first, also the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith. Now here's the real test. Learn things in context. If you learn them, what does it continue to say? Well done. How many could remember that? Right? The wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all unrighteousness, ungodliness and unrighteous men who surpass the truth, because of what may be known of God is manifested in them, for God has shown it to them. And it goes on, the whole chapter. Please read it. I can't go into the full details, but this chapter was brought to my attention by the Holy Spirit before we got married. So that I had our 50th wedding anniversary last year, and it was these days it needs applauding. Right? You really do, right? Even in the churches, right? The whole chapter goes on to describe how God gives a society up. And he ends up by saying, who, knowing the righteous judgment of God, that those who practice such things are deserving of death, not only do the same, but also approve those who practice them. That was not the case in the 1970s. Right? I can't go into it, but basically this chapter, I read it, it impacted me, and from that moment on, I've known the direction of travel in this country. I was for a while praying for revival, but I had to square the circle, I had to get things right. And this chapter is about the wrath of God against a society that's turned its back on him. And I do encourage you to read it, because I want to give you a little bit of context. You see, the question is this. In Britain, in Western societies generally, and in other places, here's what's happening generally in our societies, a sign of our times, of the society's times. Yeah. I like feedback. Yes. Yeah. Right. What about what's happening in their educational institutions at time of the time? Not just schools, universities, and everything else. Yeah. Is what's happening in their governments a sign of the times? Right? If they're signs of the times, what are they telling us is going to happen? Is what is happening in their economies a sign of their times? Yeah. Is that what's happening in their churches? Right? What time is it in Britain and other societies? What time is it? Do you know? I've got a watch. It tells me what time of day it is. End time. You missed the earlier bit. It's not. The real thing is, we are in a time when things are changing, not the way most of us would like them. Right? Now, there are some signs that tell you, can you see that picture? I think there's some signs of the times on there. Can you see that? I don't know if you can see them from where you are. There, on flagpoles, there. You might not see them. Is this a sign of the time? All right. I think that one is the classiest one I've seen. I really think the guy, whoever's done that, has been a real artist. Yeah. And, you know, some people do the same thing in a roundabout way. Oh! Now, we live near Telford. Anybody here know Telford? Right. Question. Which bit of Telford might you get something painted with a St. George's cross on it? St. George's. Yeah, look, there you are. In the circle at the top, that's where that appeared, right? I like that. That was ironic. Okay. Look, I am talking about what's going to happen to this bill and what hope we have. So I just wanted to come back to that, but you may not think I have, but I am. I haven't forgotten it, folks. Here's a good question. Why did the Holy Spirit put Romans 1, 18 to 32, which we've been talking about, in the scriptures, in the New Testament? Have you ever asked yourself a question like that about any passage? Why is that there, God? Right? It's a very good question. I encourage you to ask it and sit there and expect him to answer you. Right? Let me take it a different way. What was the sin of Sodom? Sorry? Sodomy. Everybody says that. Ezekiel, God didn't say it to Ezekiel. Right? Behold, this was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had arrogance, abundant food, and careless ease. She did not help the poor and needy. Thus they were haughty and committed abominations before me. Therefore I removed them when I saw it. Think about that. What you know as sodomy is the end of a process. There's nothing wrong with having abundant food and not having wars and things. But if you're in that society, you have to help. You, not the state, have to help the poor and needy. Because it reminds you that you might be in that situation one day. And that God has been merciful to you. If you forget to do that, by the way, let me ask you a question. Do you think Britain has arrogance, abundant food, and careless heed? And really not properly help the poor and needy? Why do you think we've gone where we have in the last 30 years or more? Why do you see that? And it is longer than that. As a child, I listened to a radio program called Round the Horn. It was a Sunday thing, right? One of the stars of it was Kenneth Williams. It was a gentle advert for the gay, what we now call the gay community. It goes back into the 1960s, 50s probably, right? It's not just all, but we've been traveling in this direction. It's thought that Paul wrote Romans between 55 and 59 AD, but the fall of Rome happened over 400 years later, right? Why could Paul, 400 years before it collapsed, see the seeds of its end beginning to sprout? He could see it because they had rejected God as their creator. Now you might think 400 years, no, it can't be a prophecy that long. Was there another Gentile society in the scriptures which had its end prophesied 400 years in advance? Well, Babylon, not quite. No, that was the first one was instant, and then there was another one, but I don't think it was 400. There's another one. Let's take you to the scriptures, right? This is God revealing the future to Abraham, and he says in the top paragraph, he's promised them the land, but they're going somewhere. Your descendants are going somewhere else, where they will be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years. But after, I will also judge the nation whom they serve, and afterward they will come out. So that was Egypt. So Egypt probably had a 400-year prophecy. But then, as for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. Don't you worry about this, Abram. And you'll be buried. Then in the 4th generation they will return, for the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet complete. God waited 400 years to judge the Canaanite society, to remove it. So Paul saying Rome's going to be judged is not a new thing. Right, I'm doing some quotes, and in the bottom here on the thing you'll have some, on my page you'll have links, that's telling you which ones it is. So I'll put them on the slide so you can cross-reference them. This tourist website says there were several reasons for the decline of the Roman empires, and they're all wound together, but the first one is a decline in morals and values. Yep. Now this, on another page they say even Joe Pax Romana, a long period, right, of over 200 years, right? There were 32,000 prostitutes in Rome. They're saying things, you know, and they became the place where the two emperors became infamous for wasting money on parties and over drinking and things like that. Just so you know, the Pax Romana, or whatever it's pronounced, was a period of relative peace. They were at rest from 27 BC to 180 Common Era, or AD as we know it, right? So for 200 years they had peace, right? But history tells us, historians largely agree, that the growing decadence and internal decay of Roman society played a crucial role in its vulnerability. Paul could see this happening, the roots of it happening 400 years. And he said, this is to the Romans, Christians, you're living in a bad society. I know it's bad, but God's not going to leave it as it is. But you, well, what did he say to them, right? Why did he say it, right? Well, first question is, he told the believers in Rome about the future to prepare them and their successors to live through difficult times, right? He wasn't telling them to get out. He was saying, no, this is where your society is heading. Paul did not warn them so they could pray for revival and therefore prevent the wrath of God from being revealed. Do we know that in Britain? Right? The revelation of Jesus Christ, written about 40 years after Paul's letter, was given to believers not so they could escape the coming trouble, but so they could be overcomers throughout it. That is still the purpose today. And remember, I said to you, that Jesus' word in Matthew 24 was to prepare them what would happen between his ascension and his return. And Christians have had to live through that. We've lived in a relative 200 to 300 years of peace. But that is not the common thing. So, as societies are crumbling around us and the signs of their times are in us, could this picture which I used earlier also apply to Christians in our society? Are we ignoring the signs of the times? This is about the schools bill, folks. And it is about the bill. I've said earlier, the chances of it not being passed are minute. The chances of it being overturned by the courts are higher, but will not be instantaneous. By God's grace, Putin might intentionally land a missile on a NATO country. That will change what happens to the bill. Right? I'm serious here. We are in a very fragile state. There was a man on Radio 4 this morning said the United Nations is falling apart. Right? On Radio 4. Right? Anything could happen. I'll come to that. Right? Britain might be declared bankrupt. That is possible. Especially with Rachel from Accounts, who I think is a wonderful account. Right? But actually, I said to some people at my bowls club about 3 years ago, can you name me one statesman in the Houses of Parliament? We used to have statesmen running this country. We don't now. We have people who have no idea. A change of government will not result in a change of civil servants. Who was the first politician to come, those who long in the tooth, who was the first politician to come up with the idea of registering every home educated child in England? Strictly Come Dancing. Ed Balls, right? 2009. That is why I'm stood here talking about politics today, because of Ed Balls, right? Who was the next people to talk about bringing in registers for every child? The Conservatives from 2015 through to 2018. And they were driving the agenda. Labour zipped their lips till the beginning of last year when they thought they were coming into power. A change of government will not result in a change of agenda unless it is a radical change, but that will bring about chaos in the nation as well. So, I think the signs of the times of this year, I wouldn't have said this last year, but watching the news, when I was, again, back in my 20s, early 20s, I remember a gentleman, some of you might know the name of Alec Buchanan, some of you might not, I accept that. He had a prophetic ministry, but he said you should always read the newspaper, you should always listen to the news with one ear on the news and one ear on God. These days, what's happened to it, I say you listen to the news with half an ear on the news and 1.5 ears on God. God, what are you doing through this? Right? And I showed those flags earlier because they were not happening last year. In August, we were in Finland visiting one of our sons, and there were the riots after the Southport event. Right? And I thought, but it isn't about migrant hostels. It's not just about immigration. Those flags are a sign that the British people are realizing that their leaders do not have their good at heart. Right? And this is bringing about the people of Britain into a peasants' revolt mode. This may change things. Please don't dismiss it as unlikely. Biblical context for you. We know that Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, was called my servant by God through Jeremiah. Right? Nebuchadnezzar was servant of God to bring divine judgment on Israel and its neighbours. Later, he told Jeremiah to prophesy about the fall of Babylon. But one of the reasons that came about we overlook, we find it in Habakkuk. It's through Habakkuk that the Lord explained that the common people will turn against their wicked oppressor and curse him, proclaiming God's wrath on him. This is a biblical concept, that the people see people who have turned from God so far that they rise up, but the wise ones do it by calling on God. We're getting there, folks. When leaders are insecure, they clamp down. Remember last August. That was another sign of the time. Right? Believers, you as believers will need wisdom to be good examples whose allegiance is to God, not man. Listen, I know Christians in the US who think Donald Trump is their saviour. They have only got one saviour, and it's not Donald Trump. He is God's disruptor. He is not thing. There is no chance of reform saving this nation. I felt a conviction from God a few weeks ago saying you cannot replace the government, but you can resist it. That is my conviction. I don't share things like that unless it's grown on me and I can't get away from it. But as God's people, we will need also to know which hill he has called us individually to die on. There'll be more than one. But it will be, as Peter said, who must I obey, God or man? You will have to do that. You will have to decide how best to invest in your children's eternal futures. Will you hand them over to the state or shield them from it? That is my big question. We are not, the ratchet is tightening. It's not going to snap off. And if something breaks it, it will break many more things around us. Right? Once the bill is enacted in regard to home education, the landscape will change. For some years now, my burden has been to alert parents, not just Christian ones, all parents, to what's happening and to do what I can to inspire you to take action. However, one thing I can't do is stand between the state and your children. That's not my job. That will be your responsibility. I know this is a very solemn message, but I cannot calm your hearts and minds simply to make you feel better. Too much depends on his people understanding their responsibilities, as his wrath is revealed even further against all unrighteousness in the Western nations and beyond. If it is the end times, it's because the whole world will have gone this way. Right? Jesus is coming back to judge the world in righteousness. And he will judge them with equity, everyone as they deserve. The whole world has got to get to the same point at the same time. I'm not worried about globalism. I see it as God's work, ripening the world for judgment. And his judgment is necessary. In 2010, the Lord stretched out his hand to stop Ed Ball's bill. He stretched out his hand again in living memory in 2022 to stop the schools bill. It wasn't a political victory, neither of them. The burden I have to share with you today is that he wants all parents, especially believing ones, to stretch out their own hands to him to protect the children he has given them. Occasional prayer meetings will not be enough to shut down this bill or to bring this government down or to change the situation. What is needed is stretched out prayer, as the church made when Peter was imprisoned. None of your translations will say they made stretched out prayer. It says they made earnest prayer. But if you look at the Greek word behind it, it is stretched out. If we want God to stretch out himself, his arm, we have to stretch ourselves out. Right? That type of prayer may prevail and result in an unexpected deliverance in the midst of difficult times. One final thing. If you want some background reading, this is from May. It's an article on Substack. Every bit of tyrannical legislation the Labour government has in the works. There was 4 bills there and published on the HE Byte this week, over the weekend, was a look at that with 1 or 2 things extra added. And that writer said that the Children's Wellbeing Bill and Schools Bill is Labour's most draconian one of the lot they've put forward. So we are at the sharp end. I just wanted to put that in so you could read it. And if you still haven't got it, there's where you'll be able to get the notes and the links and the slides and everything else.